Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Thrilled to introduce our guest today, someone who generally defies easy categorization. So Owen West is currently director of DOW's Defense Innovation Unit, DIU for short. He took on the role just about 6 weeks ago, and he's already made it clear that DIU is going to narrow its focus and move fast. In his words, invest where speed, scale, and lethality intersect. So I think what makes Owen particularly fascinating for a room like this is the path that brought him here. So he spent nearly 20 years as an energy trader at Goldman Sachs. He served 6 years as a Marine Corps infantry officer and later returned to active duty for combat tours in Iraq and took leaves of absence from Goldman Sachs to do so. Somewhere in between, he managed to find time to write 3 books, compete in a lot of endurance races before stepping into the DIU role. So I think if anyone understands both the pace of markets as well as the weight of operational decisions, it's probably Owen. Owen's being interviewed by our very own Joe Felter today, the amazing Joe Felter, head of Stanford's Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. I think at some point they're planning to attempt to climb the north face of Everest together, is what I hear.
He was like 50 meters away.
So, please welcome Owen West and Joe. Over to you.
Thanks, Ernestine. Well, Owen, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, want to give a big shout out to Major General Joe Kunkel back there, solo. DIU's military lead, deputy director. Thanks for joining us, Joe. We'll be seeing more of you, but. Yeah, Owen, so I was here in Silicon Valley back in 2015 when my graduate school advisor, Ash Carter, came and said, hey, things are broken here, we need to fix it. You know, that the military and the tech sector, the Pentagon, were not working together. You know, what was broken that the Pentagon was trying to fix back then?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Joe. You know, it's always, we were just talking with one of your students. I see her.
There she is.
She is really part of the tribe here. You know, national security has always had its place at Stanford. I think more, at least in my era, in the graduate program. So it's nice to see undergrads, you know, at these. I've got a junior, by the way, so at some point, maybe he'll show up at one of your classes.
He's always welcome.
But in terms of Silicon Valley, I think the DIU has gone through 3 basic evolutions. So rewinding to Ash Carter, the system is still broken. I want to be clear about this. And so it's just less broken, and partly because of DIU, but I don't want to, you know, our aspirations among many in the department are high because we're in a culture right now of risk-taking, and we're in this culture because the probability of war has risen and risen dramatically in the last 10 years. And you know, we shouldn't be unambiguous about what's at stake. The United States has never found itself on the other side of a loss of a major war. We've gone places and failed, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, with few consequences broadly for our society. And so when we talk about rising China or other threats, our basic goal is to rearm right now and do this swiftly. And so I'm happy to also answer questions about the budget, the percentage of the budget, why it's so high, you know, how efficient it is over the course of time. But back to 2015, what was happening was we had the recognition that one of the things we do really well in the United States is we marry free capital with entrepreneurs, which is Silicon Valley. And I'm a capitalist, so I believe that with few rules, if we capitalize good people, we have the best engineers in the world, we have the best entrepreneurs in the world. When we harness them, you know, this has catapulted the United States GDP, really. I mean, we're very fortunate that all these companies with these enormous market caps were established in the United States. Imagine where we'd be if China had established all of these companies. And I must say that for something, you know, I'm infantry, so I'm not technical, but I've seen things, you know, over the course of 55 years that have amazed me, but I've never seen a technical feat like SpaceX in Southeast Texas. And if you can go on a public highway to see what they've done there, you know, Musk particularly 22 months ago, they were building rockets under tents, and now it's this enormous complex, and ultimately they'll be building 3 starships a week and putting them up into orbit. I mean, until you've seen 40-foot high rolls of aluminum, and it's mind-blowing to a non-technical mind. So to harness all this, Carter, you know, there was confusion which was generated by the Pentagon, as there still is, among the nascent in that era, defense tech, or the re-emergent maybe is a better adjective, defense tech in Silicon Valley, which is really small compared to what it is today. And what was happening was you'd get general officers and other bigwigs showing up and saying to young companies, I need that, or I need this. And so they would go and barrel down this path and spend capital on a superior chair, only to realize that to sell to this customer was so complicated that even if they could develop the chair and what we call these requirements, this system where over the course of several years we provide all the specs that we want for this chair, the government could change its mind and they would want a better chair or a different chair, and really didn't have much capital behind this anyway. And if you wanted to be on contract, you were much better off joining one of these large prime contractors that are now under-delivering at a record rate. If you can imagine, I'm a 9/11 veteran, so if you were to go back to September the 10th, 2001, and look at the market cap of our top 10 companies and then our top 25 companies, there's been an enormous changeover. And I think back then, I'm going to say you could look it up, GE was number 1 or 2. I think Microsoft was still in there, but these other industrials still were the largest companies in the United States. And now we have several startups that are, and we're not even including SpaceX or others, that have dominated, and there's been a massive transfusion that's propelled the economy, but not in defense. In defense, if you go look up September 10, 2001 market cap, you're going to find the same companies in the same order as they were in 2001. That's how rigid that we've been. And so the basic goal of DIU then and now is to bring in new entrants and tap the commercial markets and push it forward into what we call combat power, which means a tangible effect that lowers the odds of war dramatically because the enemy sees us building up and says it's not worth it. So.
Awesome. I guess a related question. There's the good news is there's a lot of players in this space, as far as you got AFWorks, SoftWorks, the service accelerators, DARPA. How would you define DIU's mission, and what is its specific lane, and how does it differentiate itself from some of those other actors in the game?
Yeah, DIU is the principal liaison for the department to the to the commercial and non-traditional companies. We've added non-traditionals because there's so many defense tech companies that are startups. I mean, again, it wasn't that long ago. 10 years ago, most tech companies were against working with the department, and some signed protest letters and forced the companies to get out of the business. And of course, the opposite is true now. $200-odd billion have poured into defense tech. This social change, is difficult. I certainly couldn't answer that question. Why? What happened in 2020 and 21, where suddenly, as a society, we flipped and defense tech was welcome and hot, where the same basic demographic rejected working with the DOW only 2 years earlier? I don't know, but our job is to harness it.
Awesome, and you're doing great work. So I'm going to repeat a quote I think Ernestine mentioned in your introduction, but one of your memos as director, which made it the round, so a lot of people saw that. You said, I think this is to DIU, that said DIU will, in your words, invest where speed, scale, and lethality intersect. So what technologies or capability gaps are you most focused on right now at DIU?
Well, the nice thing is we don't have to determine the answer to this question. So part of the reason Secretary Hegseth, for the first time ordered a general officer and back to DIU to report for duty is to close the gap between DIU and the military services. DIU's done very well over the years, and the best evidence of that is the budget. We have about $1 billion that we're charged with stewarding for the taxpayer, but plus several other billion for other programs that have come in under the house, under the roof, including drone dominance and some reconciliation funds. But stepping back, the answer to that question is that the Joint Force and the real military experts determine the operational problems, and it's our job to determine how DIU can best solve those problems quickly with commercial tech. But just to get more specific, Secretary Hegseth wants us in 3 basic areas. The first I'll just call the high end. In my day, we used to call this overmatch, and this is developing weapons that take longer than a couple of years to field, but produce a capability that the enemy does not have that could overwhelm them. And the second is to take human beings off the battlefield. And we see what as the evidence has accumulated around the globe over the last 5 years, our budget has been slow to react to the reality that on the ground, on the ocean, in some part of the airspace, Solo can talk about the upper part of the airspace, it's now dominated by cheap robots, cheap drones, cheap fires, what we call. And so we're trying to build our own cheap fires to get ourselves over this crazy cost exchange where we win every engagement, but we find ourselves on the wrong side of the ledger on almost all of them. And so the third task that Hegseth has given us is to get cheap, to get this cost down, to lower our cost per kill, so that when we're expending munitions, we'll always have what they term exquisite, which is this overused adjective we use for it's expensive stuff, but it's really good, as you've seen with these last year of combat operations. But we also need to fill out and diversify the portfolio, just with basic diversification theory, to find the efficient frontier for all you financiers, where we have the right mix of weapons, so we are not shooting $4 million missiles, $6 million missiles at drones that you all could build and fly out at one of our aircraft carriers.
I'm going to
Not to diminish the skills in this room. Young Felter might be able to build a better drone than I can, but this is not complicated stuff. If you think about it, this group, if we had a month with commercial tech, could go strike ships off of San Francisco fairly easily. That's how commoditized a lot of the tech is.
So we'll stay on that topic, Owen, with drones and making them cheaper. You led drone dominance recently before coming to DIU. I'm going to read a quote from a recent Senate Armed Services Committee testimony, where you said that drones are the most significant battlefield innovation in generations, and that for too long the United States was hindered by self-imposed restrictions and bureaucratic red tape while our adversaries surged ahead. So what needs to change? How can we break through this bureaucracy, this red tape, given our adversaries are making drones a lot cheaper and faster than we are?
Yeah, if we go back, what's interesting and irritating is that this is all American technology. And the drone, as conceived, one of the greatest, I served as an assistant secretary of defense at that time for special operations. That's where I met Joe. And at the time, if you were to look across the DoD, there were very few kind of comparative advantages as wide as our ability, what we call surveillance strike, our ability to follow individuals, make sure that we're following the right individual, a terrorist in most cases, do this for months and kill them and no one else. No one else in the world can do this. And it's incredible. It's also very expensive. And because it's so expensive, we never pushed money into the budget to get this down to the ground infantry units, cheap drones, cheap surveillance and scale it to prevent kids from walking down dirt roads and getting blown up by mines, where they were still using, beachcombing metal detectors to go out on patrol. And so we chose quality in basic terms over quantity, and have since the end of the Cold War, and it's served us on balance very well for the wars we've fought. But that era has come to an end, and others have figured out that if you get cheap and you get cheap mass, you can stymie any kind of ground advances. You might even win a few battles this way if you watch what's unfolding in Ukraine. But from Colombia to Azerbaijan, this evidence has been accumulating. It's just the good thing about Epic Fury is now we have firsthand evidence, and so change is afoot in the department to try to reallocate and make sure that we fill out this area of our portfolio and do it quickly. This is tech that we invented. We're still the best in the world at it. We just have to dedicate some budget to it, which the Secretary is doing.
Awesome. Owen, I remember serving with you the first Trump administration, and it was our boss, Secretary Mattis at the time, had of his many famous quotes when he was asked, Mr. Secretary, what keeps you up at night? He says, nothing. I'm the Secretary of Defense of the United States. I keep other people up at night. But with that context, What's keeping you up now? What's your biggest concerns? I mean, this is a pretty important role that you and Solo are taking on. What should we be most concerned about? What does keep you up at night, if anything, other than your long workload?
Yeah. Well, look, I've got two boys who want to go into the military. This is a very personal mission for me. I don't care what happens after this role, and we're tasked again with arming. And if we're going to have the responsibility and the accountability of spending this extra money, if it goes through $500 billion to the Department of War, I think it's probably going to be a one-time slug. It might be 2 years. We can talk why in terms of GDP this is not a big number. Just to give everyone a frame of reference, we were sliding down below 3% of GDP on defense because the budget's being squeezed out by entitlements and now our debt. And the GIO has concluded that we're soon to go under 2.8, 2.7% of GDP on defense. So we're at kind of last year, and the projection from last year, we were at historic lows. Since pre-World War II, you'd have to go back to find these numbers. So during the Reagan buildup, for instance, you had 6% of GDP spent on defense. So like last year, we were like half that. But it's much worse than that because so much of our monies are spent on human capital now. Folks are paid a lot better than they were. We have many more families. Healthcare costs are much higher. From barracks to you name it, this is not a weapons budget. So if that budget were double, actually all of that would go to what we call procurement, buying stuff to arm ourselves. And so when you shrink down to 3%, actually you'd be surprised to how little as a percentage of our budget goes into procurement or buying these things. And so for this slug of money, we have to be really ruthless and economical about the way this is spent. But I view this as a one-time opportunity. I think odds are, the House, the legislature will change hands at some point. And I think it'll be tougher in the future because as our servicing our debt is going to get more and more difficult, this will start to squeeze defense over time. And so we have to use this moment in time to pivot our portfolio because I don't think we're going to get this opportunity again, if you see what I mean. And so this isn't just DIU. I mean, DIU is a small part of this. We hope to have influence on two areas, like speed and cost and helping the department, but this is the military services pivoting, and we really haven't seen this with this size money. I mean, in the modern era. So,
Oh, it's been great to work with some of your predecessors. They've been so gracious to come and speak to our classes, as are you. Going back to, Raj Shaw, Mike Brown, Doug Beck, and you're taking over. Tough mission, but if you're going to look back after your tenure, what would be some of the specific goals that you really want to get after while you're on point here for DIU?
I think we've got to be transparent in terms of how we measure things. It helps. It's just good practice to manage a business unit, but this shouldn't be a complicated question to answer. You should see that we have fielded capabilities, for instance, that have come right from DIU and land in the hands of our forward operating forces within 2 to 3 years. Our conversion ratio, meaning the projects that DIU starts, what we do is we run competitions and iterate with these commercial companies and bake them off against one another, choose a few of them, put them on contract, and then try to do a better job shepherding them into what are called POMs, which is the budgets of the military services. And those are really, our end customer is the man or woman in uniform who's going to use or benefit from the combat capability. But that broadly means the military services determine through their budgets what's really going to make it or not. And so we have to ensure that we do our best job to make sure our conversion factor, as many of our prototypes are scaled as we can and become a permanent part of these budgets. And then it's just to use commercial tech. If you look at the high side of what we do and how complicated this is, many people have pointed out, every congressional session, there's a session that points out a $50,000 bag of bolts. In my day, it was the golden toilet. We had a golden hammer once that was $32,000. These numbers are eye-watering. But now that the commercial sector has been reinvigorated, many of these components can be switched with huge cost reduction that we can use to build, other capabilities, weapons.
Nice. Well, we're coming to the end of the class, so I'm going to ask the final one, Owen. So you were undergrad at Harvard, rower, but you're doing ROTC, you commissioned in the Marines, not typical for most Harvard students. You're at Goldman, really successful, war breaks out. You leave Goldman twice to go deploy to combat. You went to the Pentagon when Secretary Madison invited you as ASD Solik. You went to Doge in the Pentagon. I remember visiting you living like in a closet with no windows in your apartment, working 20-hour days. And now you're taking on this job. So none of those experiences were for the money, clearly. So we've got students here who, they may not want to join the military or the government, but they want to serve. And maybe some thoughts on how would you encourage them to find ways to serve in ways that you did and also have a very successful career?
Well, for the record, I did have windows in my apartment in D.C., but I went out and just, Marine infantry, I went to CVS and bought plastic trash bags.
I just remember it sounded dark.
And so I taped my every window. Even my wife wouldn't visit me because she's like, man, this is like a serial killer vibe. Why don't you just buy darkening shades? You're so weird. There are many ways to serve. You don't have to be in uniform, first of all. You don't have to be in the military. What we're really, part of this tech force recruiting and these other areas of recruiting, it's, again, the department's kind of a changed place, but this administration, agnostic of the politics, is trying to tap intellectual talent and pull it in to the government, and they're raising salaries and making it much more exciting, frankly, than it was any time that I can kind of remember in my since I joined in '91, or I signed up in '87, I think. And so the way you guys are already involved implicitly as part of this kind of tribe. You're at Stanford. There's a relationship with DIU right down the road, but there's been a natural relationship with the defense world or with government service. More and more, I see the government adjusting a little bit, which is good, to Zoomers who don't want to work at the same place for 30 years. This is always a balance. In other words, how much does an institution change as each generation comes in? The military actually faces this first. at high school, right? Recruiting high schoolers. And then it has to determine how much it changes to harness high school talent. At Goldman, when millennials, who are now, I guess, old, like the oldest
Steady.
millennial, I'm going to guess is, what, 65, like 80. So the oldest millennial, the oldest millennial is like 46 years old or something. But when millennials first hit Goldman, we heard that they didn't want to work. They'd cry on the trading desk. They were calling home to their parents. They didn't want to stay at Goldman. They were flaky, and none of this turned out to be true. I will say that for the young men and women who are joining today, the senior staff NCO ranks think this is an extremely talented group of Zoomers who are joining the US military right now. And so I think the government has kind of woken up to this talent base as well. And I don't think you have to look very hard in terms of service, because you do have the government posting and hoping we get, good people on these fellowships. Now, to stay involved for the rest of your career, you guys could just use ChatGPT. This may get me over. I used writing, and I would just publish at Goldman. I would write an op-ed or two, just to stay involved. So, for instance, in 08, 09, I led a small group of veterans against the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy to ensure that gay men and women could serve, because the policy made no sense. So people kind of knew that I was still at Goldman, but was working on an issue. Then I was working on drones and facial recognition in like 2010, 11. By occasionally writing, I kept myself involved enough so that I constantly had an opportunity to go serve for a year or two if, again, my work was pretty flexible if I wanted to. And I think you'll have that opportunity. What I'm saying is it may not be writing, but the writing quality of standalone Zoomers is so bad that if you get good at writing and publish, I think you'll stay not only relevant, but very, very relevant. Even if you were to write about your experience right now as a student about to enter, what's it been like at Stanford? What's changed? What brought you to national defense? Might be a good start. But the bottom line is ultimately you'll make contacts, and as long as you maintain once you leave campus, it takes work, but if you maintain those connections, others like you want to serve, and you'll be asked, and you'll have the opportunity. It'll be a question of whether you want to take the discount and have your salary drop dramatically, and I've always found that was worth it. But anyway.
Well, Owen, thanks for continuing to serve in this incredibly important time, this incredibly important role you're in, and thanks for joining us and sharing your insights. Let's give them a hand.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.